style, engaging in modes of storytelling that collectively reimagine accountability, collaboration, and truth-telling. He currently teaches an array of media and film classes from elementary after-school programs to college classroom and coaches fifth grade basketball at Jefferson Elementary School. So our two panelists met each other through filmmaking classes at Community Bike Works in the summer of 2019. Nashira was a student of Drew's, creating her first film in his class. And he was telling me how impressed he was by her collaboration. She was not only not only writing and directing her own film, but was a cinematographer and producer on her peers' films, you know, really taking on the range of roles in filmmaking. So before we begin this conversation, I'm going to share a link to Nashira's first video in the chat. It's just under 3 minutes, and Nashira and Drew feel really frame the discussion nicely. So I'm going to put a link to this video in the chat, and let's all take a moment and watch the video, and then come back to the Zoom session. And before we leave, Nashira and Drew, anything else you'd like to share before we get started to frame the viewing of the video?
I think for me, it's just a technical thing of when we watch the video, just making sure everyone mutes themselves, because this sort of audio sync gets really strange. I've been teaching in a lot of classrooms and doing a lot of video share, and that's always something to be aware of. Nashira, was there anything that you wanted to say before we watch your film?
I would just say enjoy, and I don't know, enjoy it. Yeah, that's it.
Great. Okay, so without further ado, there's the link to the video in the chat. So in a few minutes, once everyone's done, let's say at, I don't know, 5:12, we can all come back and start the conversation. Maybe give it another, I don't know, few seconds or so. See if folks are still watching. I spoke with Drew on the phone, and Nishira, I saw you in your film. So nice to see you sort of in real time.
Even though I didn't like get to meet you or speak to you personally, it's very nice to meet you as well.
And I see chats coming in, congratulating you. It truly is a beautiful film. So as we're waiting for folks to come in, Drew and Nishira are going to start the conversation. And then at a certain point, we'll open it up to questions from the group. You're welcome to type your questions in the chat, and I'll moderate the chat. I can ask your question for you, or you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question at that point. But if you do unmute yourself, I ask that you wait until we start accepting questions, just so that your question comes at a good time in the conversation. And if you run into any trouble unmuting yourself, you can just use the hand raise feature, and I'll unmute you for you. So with that said, I will pass the spotlight over to Drew and Nishira.
Sure. Thank you so much, Rachel. Really appreciate it. And Ken, thank you for creating and holding this space. We really are happy to be here and excited to talk about it. And I think I'll start by saying that, I think we're going to keep it pretty conversational, and we welcome questions. And we're excited for your questions as well. But I think today what we're going to move through is a couple of different things. We're going to talk about the film that you just saw and Nishira's experiences with that film and that program, allow that to sort of transition us to talking about what Nishira is currently doing. And then to think about, I think, before we sort of bring into questions, if we get there in time, really thinking about Nishira, who's, your bio is always astounding, Nishira, but who is also doing a lot of activism right now and thinking about this relationship between community media, editorial control, and in particular thinking about young people within that framework as well, and what it means to, to not only be able to sort of do this work in the community, but also to present the work and to do both those things. But I think the first thing this year, just in reflecting on this was over a year ago now that you did this. And first off, just seeing Matthew in there, I'm always just like, Matthew. But just thinking about watching this now again for what feels like the 100th time, because we've seen it in so many different spaces and places. One of the things that really stood out to me was less to do specifically about the film and more to do about the memories around the film. And one of the things that I really remembered was that moment in which you found that music and you were just like, this brings this all together. So maybe if we can just start reflecting on that for you, seeing that a year later, what were some of the things that stood out to you, both in the making of this, but also in thinking about the poetry that you do, this relationship between film? But maybe let's just start by thinking about what was the experience for you watching this, a year later?
I would say with sounds and everything, all the sounds were still pretty accurate to how I would make them today. One, because I am a Black person in America and I feel what it feels like to be a Black person in America. When I'm not saying that it should be this way, but when a Black person who feels threatened by a police officer, you feel a heartbeat. You feel that pulse in your body. Oh, something bad can potentially happen in this moment. So you're going to do everything in your power to not get on that road. So you feel a heartbeat and you hear it. It's you feel it all over your body. It's a feeling and a sound, I guess. So I feel once we heard that pulse, I was that needs to go in there. It was just key on, it belongs in there. I could relate to this in so many different ways. I feel that was one. And then the poetry. I wrote those poems in middle school. And then what I did was I revised them over time, and then I put them in there because it had something to do with what I was talking about, and it had the message that I was trying to put out. And I feel like it pretty much explained everything that the video was supposed to come off as. Like, it had everything to an extent, like both poems straight on, and it had everything that I wanted to say. It spoke clearly on the topics that I wanted to hit. The memories, it just brings back a whole lot, like a whole lot of deep thinking, the brainstorming, the storyboarding, the recordings. Is like, we had a whole, like, we went into deep conversation. Like, I know, like, a lot of the times me and Avery, who was like half the time either helping me record or like focusing on my sound or figuring out another way that we can make this like hit hard. We thought about a lot of like deep touching things. And yes, Avery was a cinematographer. It was a lot, and it was like deep thought. We was in deep thought like throughout the whole process. And that was, I feel like that was the key part that made it bust, I would say. I like that word, bust, for this. Yeah. Okay, I'm done answering that question.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about like when we arrived at that space, you know, we had, and when I say we, I'm thinking about your peers, I'm thinking about the students that I was teaching in that space, and students were coming from so many different angles of creativity, right? And Nashira, Eric and Avery both all came off publishing poetry the year before. So I knew coming into the space that they were poets and that they were interested in this idea of sort of translating poetry to a film. We had other students that sort of started just from an idea and started from the ground up of being like, well, this is what I want, the idea. And sometimes that idea was really broad. Like I'm thinking this year about Christian's film of being like, well, I want to tell a story about gun violence in Allentown. It's like, that's such a complex story. So we had to figure out, okay, like how are we going to tell that? What is the sort of angle that we're going to take? And who are the people that we are talking to? But I think the thing I appreciated most about the program was the fact that like every film was just so different in terms of like the approach, and so unique in terms of the approach. And I think that came from this, you know, this ultra sort of collaborative space in which not only are you operating as a director and writer on your film, but you're also acting as a cinematographer on this film. You're doing the light for this film. You're doing the sound for this film. And so what did it mean to you, not only to see your film sort of be completed? And I know the answer to this because I remember talking about this. I remember how excited you were when you saw Sharif's film in the library for the first time, when you saw your peers' films, but like, what did it mean to you as a collaborator to also see your peers and your friends succeeding as well and creating, you know, telling the stories that they wanted to tell?
To be honest, working with everybody and then seeing the outcome was so impactful and powerful. I felt like I understood, like I got to know everybody on a different level. I've known them for years, like I would say 5 or 6 years I've known these people. And there was things that that came upon us that we have never figured out about each other until we did this film and everybody else's film, and how they worked was different. Like the type of process that they went through, the type of studying process, the brainstorming, a lot, editing process, recording, just to see the way they thought was so impactful. It was just like, well, if I look at things the way they look, maybe I'll get a different outcome. And most of the time things did happen like that. You got an idea from somebody else's video and it'll help you it'll impact your video. And it was just like, having peers is always good in a way. Like I felt like really proud of them, especially with my brother Sharif. I was just like, wow, I'm really proud of him.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking as well about you know, one of the things that I want to do with this panel as well is just, and this is what I do with the students all the time in terms of being really explicit about the process, right? About like what we're doing. so that it's not always just like the sort of like sleight of hand. And I think that's part of learning about film too, right? It's like you learn the technical pieces of not just how to create this, or for Nishira to hand me the camera and be like, can you film this for me? But for each of us to sort of understand the mystery behind those technical processes so that we can make more informed and intentional decisions. And I think that's something that was really important to me in the classroom, was like never approaching it from a teaching standpoint of being like, oh, like this is really, I like this year. Like this is a good decision. This is a strong, it's like, why are you making that decision, right? Why are you deciding that that's how this poem that you wrote and revised and that you hold really close to you translates into these images? And I think from a technical perspective as well, one of the things that I really try to do, and you know, Nishira knows this, our students know this, is like trying to show as much work by other filmmakers and artists as possible in the classroom space, so that our students can actually arrive at the space with their own sensibilities. You know, Rachel read my bio earlier, which is always embarrassing to hear, but it's like, I have sensibilities as a filmmaker. You know, for me as a documentarian, and Ashira is actually a production fellow on the feature that is in the next session, so she's a part of that as well. And she knows that like, I have my sensibilities as a filmmaker. You know, I am very patient, very like all these different things. And like, that might not be my students, right? So how do we actually create a space in which our students can see work and actually make decisions and be like, oh, you know what, that music video, I like this moment in this. Like this year, I'm thinking about like how the Solange music videos that we saw, like the slow zoom, like all these different things. And so I guess for you, like what were some of the things that you were really inspired from, both for this film, but also like thinking about the artwork that you make, the poems that you make? Like what are some things that inspire you when you think about your artwork and your storytelling?
I think that like anybody who really follows my poetry would pretty much like not guess, it's pretty obvious that I'm very heavy on social justice and social equality, and I'm heavy on speaking up for the Black community. I'm very heavy on speaking on what's right. So yeah, I think that's something that's like really empowers me to continue my poetry and stuff like that. I would say something else that inspires me would be like just being a Black female growing up in America, living in, I wouldn't say that I live in poverty, but living in an area that has like a lot of different backgrounds and a different types of way of going about life. I would say just having many different types of everyday experiences since growing up in America, also in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I would say like, yes, the videos too, that help, the videos that you presented to us, that helped the people that came in, specifically Annie. Annie's video helped me like, how do I say this? She taught me how to like put myself out there, but not like put it out there to where it's just like, that kind of offended somebody. You're not supposed to say stuff like that. So yeah, she helped me with that. Cause yeah, it could have been about certain, like it could have been like about different groups and different types of people. But at the same time, I wasn't offending anybody. I was speaking the truth, but I wasn't offending anyone. And I feel like you and Annie taught me how to do that very, 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 I would say, equally. Another thing that inspired me was my mother. She has like a big positive impact on anything that I do. She's always there to have that other eye, because we're so much alike. Like we're so much alike and we're so in sync. It's crazy. It's like she's my older twin. So yeah, she's always there to like look over my work, and if I mean something, she'll like be like, okay, baby, is this how you really want to say this? And if it's like, if I'm being negative and I'm not looking at the positive side of it, she'll tell me. She's like, you can say this another way. You don't always have to be so hard and jumpy on it. You can say it in another way so that it eases off nicely, so that they can understand where you're coming from and not specifically jumping out at you when you get feedback. So yeah, that helps. And just seeing how like life is moving in America and society in America, and also like what I'm learning in school. So basically everything around me that is a big impact, has a big impact on my artwork. So everything around me, yes. I'm not going to go in depth on everything.
And I think about this a lot too, in terms of being like, you know, sometimes I'll feel like guilty about not creating something, like not making the film, not going out and shooting, but just like realizing that like anytime I move through the world and I'm present, that's a way of informing what I'm doing, right? Like anytime that I'm in a space and I'm sort of aware of what's going on around me, and I'm sort of looking or I'm paying attention to the light, which is something I'm always doing, like just thinking about how that informs that as well. In the same way that like, you know, all the teaching I do, the only reason I'm a good teacher is because of you. The only reason I'm a good teacher is because of the students at Jefferson. Like they, all those experiences translate into the present and into the future of being like, okay, how do I design the next thing? But I think this is a really good spot in the share to actually, I'm thinking about what your mom, how you describe what your mom does for you in terms of thinking about, okay, like, how do we create this work that can be, and I'm going to use the language that we came up with in our team for this film that we'll describe in a second, because Ken earlier was like, can't wait for the feature. It's like, the feature's coming, like, but you know, we're not rushing. So just thinking about the ways that, you know, what does it mean to create work that does that confrontation, right? That says, this is what we want to confront. And by confronting it, you know, we're dealing with it, we're grappling with it. But then also what we're doing in this next film in terms of being like, let's conjure something up too. Do you want me to describe what we're working on in our team, or do you want to take a shot at it? Me? Okay. So the film that Nashira is working on right now, and what I really appreciate about this also is the way that, as I spoke about, the way that like the past informs the present and the future as well. So this program became the most important program in terms of understanding what Nashira is a part of now, which is actually a year-long program that we're doing, where Nashira and a team of students are actually co-directing a film, and they're co-directing a film specifically about policing in schools. And policing in schools, not just as the physical presence of police officers in schools locally, but also in terms of how that logic informs her experience, the experience of her peers, both from on a local and a national level. So that's the film that Nashira is working on. And as we came around language of it, one of the things we wanted to do is we wanted to confront that, right? We wanted to confront that in our schools, but we also wanted to conjure up this world that people are telling us is impossible, right? Nashira, that like when you go out and you're talking about it, people are like, oh, we can't do that. That's not possible. That's this. It's like, we also want to do this dreaming in our documentary of what might be possible. And I don't think that is possible without actually committing to a longer process of like, let's make a film, and let's do it in a way that doesn't necessarily orient product in terms of being like, well, you know, at the end of this semester, we have to produce this and you have to see it, but actually orients process, so that we can fall in love with that part of it, the process part of it, and be like, okay, I am committed to the film, to the story, in ways that are going to make the film and the story even stronger and even better. So that's sort of the film and what Nashira and I are working on right now with several other students. We also have filmmaking mentors and producers, which are professional filmmakers that are doing this work as well. And so all of that is sort of happening in the same space.
Well, we have a few questions coming into the chat. Is now a good time to throw a few questions to the two of you?
That sounds perfect. I just want to say to Nashira, if there's any questions that you don't want to answer, you can just pass it to me, okay?
So I'll start from the top. We have a question from Ken. Nashira, you're so inspiring. I'd love to hear an example of something you phrased in a way that your mentors suggested you phrase less offensively and how you then rephrased it.
There's been like different, like there's been a lot of things because as like just the person that I am, I'm very nice and like, I guess you can say sweet, but at times when I'm speaking on something that's very like passionate and strong felt to me, I come off very aggressive. So like pretty much anything serious might come off negative. So like I wanted to, so when editing my poem, what was it? The one that talks about Japanese flowers in the spring. I wanted to say something about the president specifically. I said I want the world to see that he is like racist and like just go in depth. And I was just going in. I forgot along the lines of what was going on, but Jill was like, "How about we do it not in that way and just like have it to where they understand what you're saying, but it's not you're attacking him." Because you don't want people to see you as an attacker. You want people to see the issue and not the big deal, like the serious, like the badness of it. If you know, I don't know how to explain it. But I didn't do that because I felt like it could go to another route, that I could do it in another way, because I just like, I didn't want to use that. I wanted to have it to a certain tone. I wanted to have the video as a certain tone, so I didn't do that. And Drew, you could answer to this as well too, because I know I know you probably remember something that I said, because I don't remember everything.
I feel like we were also contending with the fact that like this is a historical moment, yes, but it's also one that is riddled with and informed by history. So like to produce a sort of singularity of being like, this is where I want to aim this, is actually to say, or you know, I think one of the things that your poem does so beautifully is it actually contains that history, right? It says this is informed by history. And I feel like our conversation was very informed by that in terms of thinking about how do we contend with the history and not necessarily the individual, which the individual is a product of this, if that makes sense. That's sort of in my memory of like our conversation.
And we have another question from Rebecca. Nashira, what appeals to you about poetry as a way of conveying your ideas? And do you have any poets who have inspired you? Recently, our English 2 class read poems by Langston Hughes and Claude McKay and Dudley Randall, who covered everything from the church bombing in Birmingham to the ideas of dreams deferred. So we've been talking a lot about how powerfully poetry can affect people.
I would say that the people who like inspire me in poetry, well, okay, yeah. I would say like Maya Angelou is somebody that's like pretty like big on my list. My mom has we've used her together to actually get me through a lot of tough times in life. Tough times, wow. I would say Maya Angelou. I would say Justice Davis. I don't know if you guys know her. She's in New York right now. Her and my cousin, let me get this right. Judkins. Okay, Michael Judkins. I say it wrong. He's a poet slash playwright, I guess you could say, playwriter. They inspire me on the level of like, they're an inspiration. How would I say this? They inspired me in the ways of like showing me that you can write what you want. Poetry is one of those outlets where you can say what you want and people won't be too offended because it's poetry. And poetry is like a thing where you can write out what you want and nobody can really come at you for it because it's poetry. So I would say those were my outlets and my creative like points where I could just write something and then get feedback on it and take that constructive criticism from what they would say, excluding Maya Angelou, because you know I have no connection to talking to her. So yeah. And then at that I would take like phrases too, like different types of phrases, like specifically I have an I Can't Breathe poem that I wrote, and I took that and I used that and I just wrote off of God, I wrote off that poem. And it was like it took some feeling up, and it pushed out a lot of emotion and different thoughts that came about. And it was just like, that's something that really, really helped me. So like, it just helps me by really getting in a place where, what would I say? Getting in a place where I'm at ease, but then also doing research a lot, that helps. So research really helps. And just gathering different stories that's in the position of where I want to write, in the topic of what I want to write about. So yeah, that's something that also helps. And what was the other part of the question?
I think you mainly addressed it. It was
totally
asking about
it. Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you so much, Nashir. I appreciate it.
And I have to jump in and say, as somebody who teaches studio art, I can relate to, you know, this idea of communicating certain ideas in say a creative medium that, you know, where maybe you can express things with more ease or catch people in a sort of disarmed place in a way that you might not be able to do with, say, nonfiction and like reportage. So so I have a question for the two of you. This actually came up in my drawing class earlier today. How would you say the various ways that your the classmates in the class and their interests informed your film, and how would you say you've used, say, the creative sort of the creative decisions to communicate your intention effectively in both this film and your poetry?
You want to go first, Drew? Or do you want me to go?
You can go for it.
Okay, I would say that my peers, their insight, specifically on the part where, I don't know if you guys remember, but it was the PPL arena, and then it was a poll. There's flags in the background. My best friend Avery, he actually was like, I feel like this would make, I remember, like, I don't know why that was the first thing I remember, but that's something that I always remember. He said, I feel like this would sit on a lot of people's heart if you just like have the American flag in the background and you doing another still image. That would be like so, and then it's moving in the background. It was so amazing. He was like, I think you should use this. So his insight like really, really made it like obvious and made a bigger impact on my video than I thought that it would. So I was, because I'm really one of those people, I'm like, at first, like I learned a lot from just that one workshop that we did when we created our films. Like I learned that you can't just be accustomed to your own ideas, that you have to be able to open up to other people's ideas too, because you can learn a lot from someone else's like story or past, I would say. So yeah, and insight too. And I would say like when Justice read over my poem for the first poem, when she read over the first poem, she said, she was like, I want you to rewrite this. I'm not going to tell you what you did wrong. I'm not going to tell you what you did right, but I want you to rewrite this poem and I want you to add more to it. So I was like, okay. Then I redid it and she was like, I feel like this is better. That you should rewrite it again, but this right here, this is perfect for the type of feel that you want to give to your video. And then this is where me and Drew went to both poems and chose which, like what place to put it in. And then how we wanted to like add image, if we wanted to add images in, like the transitioning and the sounds and everything, that's where everything took into place. So I feel like this video was a big, like input was a big major part of the film. Just input and criticism, constructive criticism, and just like help. Like it made a really big impact. So yeah, you can go now, Drew.
Thanks. And I'm just gonna two of the things that Nashira's brought up now is actually, which is really critical to I think the imagining of this program that happened a summer ago, but I think also like starting to imagine what it might be possible in our virtual spaces and creating, community in these virtual spaces as well. Is Nashira referenced Annie Diaz, who came into the classroom and showed her film and was able to have students ask her questions and to be right there to be able to answer them and to screen it with them and to have access to filmmakers. And then Justice as well, Justice Davis, who now lives in Brooklyn, coming in and sharing her poetry, leading poetry workshops. So like for me, I'm endlessly inspired by the work of the filmmakers that I actually are in my community sort of directly, that I get to see both the process and the film. But I think for me as an educator, not only is my teaching informed by my students, but it's also informed by the educators that are coming into the space around me. And so like thinking about, that, and then what that translated to, right, Nashira, is like in this program that we just taught, we were working with 10 different artists, right? 10 different filmmakers filmmakers, artists, educators were teaching this online program, right? And thinking about the ways that we can actually not only sustain really important creative communities, because Nashira, Avery, Eric, Sharif were all in that program, this summer's program. So like, how do we build that continuity? But also this idea of like, how do we actually begin to rethink what is possible within these virtual spaces of like, now we actually can do that. Like when Annie came this year, I had to drive to Lancaster before class, pick up Annie, drive back to class, teach class, drive back to Lancaster, drive back to, so like what is possible when we start, thinking about virtual, hybrid, different ways of creating new community as well as sustaining our creative communities locally. But I think, for me, like that was one of the most inspiring things in the classroom this past summer, was actually not only teaching, but co-teaching, co-designing that class of Faster Day, and then also, teaching alongside 8 other artists and filmmakers that were each bringing their own sensibilities, styles, forms into the classroom, and like having that for our students as well. Where like we ended up having like a 1-to-1 ratio of teacher to student, so that we can begin to sort of deconstruct ideas of like what classroom spaces look like, right? That it doesn't have to come from one educator out. It can actually come from multiple educators and work both ways. And then you, Nashira, like your work endlessly inspires me, both as an educator and as a filmmaker, right? Like thinking about telling this local stories, but also just like the ways in which like you make me a better teacher because of how you show up to class and how committed you are to your peers and how committed you are to the values of the classroom that we set up. Like that's all informed by you as well, by your mom, by Sharif. Everyone that's in that space informs how that space sort of moves.
Great, thank you. And another question from Vertel. So I think coming back to this idea of censorship or editing, why do revolutionary ideas require shade from so-called deviants, yet the haves can say and act without judgment? Triple standard. And then doesn't temperance thwart innovation in the arts? So you two can respond to the second part first, or the first part second.
This year, I see you pointing at me. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the best way to sort of answer this question is actually to start moving towards an idea of thinking about how young people are actually telling their stories and coming into the work. I don't know if I can answer this question sort of directly. I would love if it was reframed to sort of think about how I could answer that directly. But I think the thing that made me think of when I saw that in the chat was like thinking about the ways that, students being able to show up in the space to do so safely and to do so in ways that are collaborative require a trust and collaboration within the space where these ideas are constantly being bounced around their peers, constantly sort of shaping and forming not only from their peers, but from teacher and then teachers' ideas of what the classroom is, adjusted by students, and then thinking about the guest artists that we had come in and how that influences the idea. And that to me is innovation, right? Like, how do we get away from, when Nashira is making choices about her film, the teacher coming over and saying, hey, Nashira, like, no, like this, do this. This is what has to be done. And actually trusting that Nashira knows exactly what she needs to do. She wrote that poem. This is her story. And she's able, with these resources and tools, to tell the story the way that she needs it to be told. And that to me is innovation. That to me is being able to say, you know what, like the way that presentation is so informed by collaboration and by building a collaborative classroom. And I think just real quick, I just wanted to bring this into the space as well, because I think something that really guides that is this quote that's really essential to the classroom space, and it's from Bell Hooks. And she says, as a classroom community, our capacity to generate excitement is deeply affected by our interest in one another, in hearing one another's voices, in recognizing one another's presence. That has been a sort of core sort of like foundation of how we understand the classroom, that like in order to innovate, in order to create, not only I as a teacher need to be excited about Nashira's work, about her peers' work, but also Nashira is excited about her peers' work, right? And she's collaborating with her peers, and her peers are collaborating with her. And we're able to create this space that we are innovating and moving and changing ideas and all these different things. And again, this is why we're doing the program that we're doing now, where we dedicate so much, commit to so much time for this to form, is being able to actually be like, okay, how do we innovate? And how do we innovate what is expected from, a program? How do we innovate and say, you know what, let's take a year to make this next film, instead of being like, here's the film, we're done with this is done, because it's such a complex issue that Nashira is wrestling with. So how do we also reframe how we, fund grants, or look for grants? How do we reframe, product-oriented work? How do we reframe the ways that capitalism is informing art, and especially film as well, as something that's commercial, as something that's transactional, as like, I need to make this to give this to you, versus being committed and falling in love with that process and letting those memories actually be the most important thing versus that product. So these are all things that are informing the sort of classroom spaces. But I think as well, I would like to use this moment actually to pivot, Nashira, and think about your activism, because I'm in a space and place now where I'm thinking about like solutions, and I want to think about your activism, how your activism was presented by sort of media, right? Because this is the form we're working in. It's media, it's communication, right? So I want to think about that, and I want to think about that dynamic between that and how you creating your work, whether it's poetry, film, is working against that, or is working sort of in a different space. So maybe if you can start and sort of just talk to us about the sort of activism that you've been committed to over the past couple of months, and also thinking about what it means to have your commitment sort of miscommunicated, right? Because of these issues of like not having any sort of editorial control, or issues of not sort of being a part of that process. So I'm gonna hand it to you. Does that sound good? I'll pass it to you. Go for it.
So okay, so I'm gonna start and then I'm gonna backtrack, but I'm gonna start. Okay. So when I first started like getting in the community and into the activism, it was around, I would say June, June, around that time. But when I had my first getting police out of schools, like I would say talk, because it wasn't a rally, it wasn't a protest, it was a discussion. It was at the Arts Park, but the news, specifically the morning call, they had a headline that was Junior of Deer High School tries to get wants cops out of schools. That was the headline. And everybody took it as a negative. and they didn't put it as like, I want to have a discussion about it. Like, I want to talk about why they're in schools, not I'm going to jump into it and just say that I want them out of schools already. I just wanted to have a discussion on why they were there and the information around it, like what's going on. And I wanted different people to attend, but instead they had it in negative. I got a lot of negative feedback from, like, I wouldn't say media. Well, it was on the media, but from different people. Like, it was teachers, I would say, like different types of workers in the community, different people. Mainly people who disagreed with the whole situation, but it was like a negative. There was a lot of negative feedback. They called our students animals, called us, what did they call us? They called us clowns. They called us wilds. They called us a lot of things. And they basically shifted the blame on us on why there's cops in schools already before even hearing my part. So that didn't really, like, it was negative, yes, and it hurt people's feelings, yes. I didn't really take it as a negative. What I did was I was like, this is going to push me to do more. So that's what I did with that. I just let that go. It didn't really affect me. It affected my mom, like, really, really bad, because they were saying a lot of different things, people from all over. But what I did was I took their comments and I turned it into poetry. So, like, different things that they would say, I took it off the Facebook comment and I put it into a poem. So yeah, I would write a poem about how I felt on the situation and how I felt in schools, how my peers felt in schools. Each time I would specifically say that I have no specific issues or negative, I had no negative encounters with the police officers. I've never had any negative confrontations, nothing. I've always had positive encounters. We've had community coffee with the police officers with my church. We've always done something together. I've never had a negative thought about them. Well, I've never had like a negative interaction. But it kind of switched once the headline was put up. So this is where I backtrack. Before I actually like started sharing my poetry out, I tried to do like this. It was okay. So February is Black History Month, and in school they would let you. Well, they didn't really have anything until one of my CSI community and schools workers. They started this thing. Rodney B. He allowed students to get on the loudspeaker and present poetry about on the topic of Black History Month. My principal specifically told me that I couldn't read one of my poems because it was too strong, or it was too it would get kids riled up and it would like confuse them. And ever since then, I'm just like, why would it confuse you of all people? Why does it matter to you? Our students need this. It wasn't negative and it wasn't hurtful. So I don't get why I couldn't share it. So he like basically put took a negative turn on it. But what I did do is I also took that poem and I entered it into the Maya Angelou I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings contest, and I won that, but I never got to go to it because Corona was that same week. But it was just a lot. So that was a negative thing. It was a positive thing, and then it turned into a negative thing. And then there was a positive thing that happened, but it turned into a negative as well. But after I'm speeding up back to the media part. It was just consistently where people have told me that what I was doing was wrong. But it's a thing where people get to have their own opinions, basically. Whether cops should be in school, whether they shouldn't. The thing I was focused on was, what does the people want? And it just turned into a whole big blob. Answering the other half of the question to the part where like what I'm doing and other things for the activism and stuff. I've worked with Black Lives. Well, first of all, I had 3 different discussions on policing in schools. The first one was to see the idea of why they're in schools. 32. That's so far from now. we had a discussion for the police and schools, getting ideas and stuff. And then the third one was where we actually spoke to board. The second one was when we actually spoke to board members of the Allentown School District to figure out like the contract between them, what's in the contract, their pay, what's going on. Like, does the city help them? What happens in that whole thing? Like, what is our money being used on inside of the school for the police being inside of the school, and what it could be used on instead of being used in there, other when having them in there. So what happened when having SROs in there? Why am I talking about that? Okay. Then the third one was just basically, we were thinking like this could be the last one, but we can still protest and talk about other things while including the thought of why SROs in school. So the third one, basically we had another discussion. We had more board members attend, and we talked on more things that they've been doing to like break the contract, and also different ways to patch it up. So there's always, once you take something out, you always need to have something in place so that it doesn't break a system, if you know what I mean. Like if we have police in schools, right? If we were to take them out, what do we put in place for like a positive? Like what can we put there so that nothing else happens? And my solution to that was get better principals, better attendance, guidance, get better structured positions inside the school other than an armed police officer to monitor a student. We don't need that. We need people there who, I'm not saying that they don't care. What I'm saying is we just need people who understand us, who are there for us, and who can understand the track that we want to go on. We don't need people to like hover over us. We don't need to feel like we're being monitored or we're being criminalized or prosecuted because of something of a thought, you know? So that was another thing. That was another purpose, and then a cause and effect. We'll look at that later. I'm sorry, I get very distracted easily. I'm sorry. That was another thing that we did, and that was with Lehigh Valley Stands Up. Then there was a set of, I think 6 or was it 5, Drew? 5 City Hall.
Oh, you're muted.
Yes, no,
that was. I feel like I did. Yeah, I was maybe 5. The number
maybe.
Maybe.
Okay, if not 5, then 4. It was definitely 4. And we spoke, like we just got together and we did a whole bunch of things. We talked about school to prison pipeline there. We just spoke on a lot of serious issues inside of the community and different like insights that we had on it. And we sat there as a community during Corona outside waiting, just listening to what happens, and listening on the subjects inside of City Hall as a community. And we spoke on these like every Wednesday. We were there from about 5 to like, I remember the last time we were there, we were like 12. They're 12. I was like, man, I got school, but not school. What do you call it? It was a program that we were doing, Drew. We were working on that a long time, but we were working and working and working and working. And we were there every week, and we were there until we got, we were trying to put together a community patrol board. I think that's what that was. It was a community. They want to make decisions before the police make decisions.
It was the review board.
Yeah, it was a review board. That's what it was. Sorry, I'm pointing again. My mom taught me about that. I'm sorry. Okay, so that's what that was. It was a review board, and we got it, but it took a while because it was supposed to be one meeting where we presented it to them, and then the second meeting they were supposed to vote on it. They did not vote on it, so we waited, and it was 4. They did. They didn't vote on it the third time, so then they said they were going to revote, and then the day that they said they were going to revote, they actually voted. And then the day after that, we did a protest, and all of our protests were peaceful, and we did it because we want to see change in our community. We see a bigger picture. We see community. I feel this whole like through this whole Corona, this is the most community that I've seen in a while, and I feel like this is something good, and I feel like we're gonna do something powerful. If it's not this the generation before, because this generation's almost over. if it's not the generation from before, it's going to be this generation, or it's going to be the next generation. But I feel like a very strong impact on our community if we just stick together and keep on fighting. Whew, that's a lot of talking.
Yeah, and Nashira, I so appreciate your commitment to collaboration, both in what the story that you just described, in terms of being, let's have a conversation, let's start a dialogue, right? But also thinking about the ways in which like that commitment also shows up in your work, right? It shows up in your films. You know, Nashira, you know, in a different program that we taught, was also trying to build and did build a sort of social media platform to share her friends' work and to share other artists' work. So like this to me seems like such a core value. I feel like one of the things I would like to do is both talk about and maybe, you know, with everyone here as well, and to sort of dream up some solutions to some of the things that we've been talking about. And so like, to me, like, you know, in Nashira's story is this issue of non-collaboration, right? This issue of Nashira taking this collaborative approach to activism, to storytelling, and being met by an institution that is not matching that for her. And so like, one of the things that I'm really passionate about and, you know, have engaged with in different spaces that I don't see around here and would love to you know, really see around here is, you know, community media models, you know, people-powered media models. I think Philadelphia does a really great job of this with Philly Cam and Scribe Video Center, like the ability not only to gather around films like Nashira's and talk about it. And I think that the events that we did gather around and were able to talk about the films that our students presented were beautiful. But like, what does it actually look like to have that sort of foundational structure within our community where we can not only come around work, but also create work, right? What does it look like? You know, for one of the things that happened last summer is like the grant that we got, I was able to buy a lot of film equipment for my students. Like how do we continue that momentum? How do we allow that to become a space where Nashira can be like, hey, I have this idea, let me go here, pick up the camera and go shoot. Like what does it look like as an infrastructure within our city to actually change the ways in which stories are presented? And that doesn't have anything to do with who has currently power over narrative, right? Which, in my opinion, in Allentown are developers and police. And those are the only two stories you get largely coming out of Allentown. So how do we begin to disrupt that? And I think Nashira is already disrupting that. So to me, it's like, how do we begin to support the work that Nashira and her peers are doing and hold core values within that, to say that we're committed to collaboration, we're committed to thinking about classrooms as spaces of excitement, of joy, of all these different things, that like Nashira does not have to come into the space and be like, you know, I have this thing that's weighing heavy on my mind and do this. She can do that, but she can also come in and be like, you know what, I have this really joyful story that I want to tell. And we support it, and finding ways to support all of that, I think is really, really critical. And again, back to the film that Nashira is working on right now, like, and I'm really excited about in terms of being a part of that process, is thinking about like, how do we confront, right? But also how do we conjure up? I'm thinking about like Ashley and that language of being like, oh, like how do we dream up the spaces that we need, right? How do we dream up the space in school that our students, that your peers, that you need? So that to me is like another thing that, you know, I don't know, Nashira, if you have any sort of direct sort of things that you've been thinking about solution-wise, but that's one that's been really heavy on my mind in terms of being like, how do we begin to build an infrastructure of this?
And I want to interject for one moment, because there's a question that we want to make sure the two of you answer. And I think, Nashira, you can answer the question Drew's posed to you broadly, sort of in the world at large, and then also specifically in terms of the Northampton Community College community. And that is, what can the NCC community, students, faculty, administration do to support the issues you've addressed here today? So I think, you know, you can address Drew's question and then, you know, speak directly to the Northampton community as much as possible, to whatever degree you can.
Drew, can you re-ask your question, please?
It's essentially what can the Northampton Community College community, the students, faculty, and administration do to support the issues you've addressed here today?
Drew, what did you say before?
Oh, the question I was thinking about, Nashira, was just like this idea of solutions. Like, as I think the work that you've done has been so committed to listening. And so I'm wondering if there's any solutions that you've been dreaming about in terms of thinking about the school that you want to be in, thinking about the community that you want to be in. And that's sort of more my question.
Yeah, I've kind of dreamed of like multiple, like there's different things that I've thought about that could possibly happen in the future. Like if we were, well, we're planning on it, but like we want SROs out of school. And I feel like if we were to take them out of school, we would replace it with somebody who's caring, somebody who's understanding, somebody who's been in the situation. Well, I'm pretty sure everybody's been in school before, but somebody who understands the situations that we have to face in life and the different obstacles that we hit every day. And like, there's different backgrounds, there's different cultures, people understand things in a different way. If we had somebody inside of the schools other than like a guidance counselor or like a social worker to try to like manipulate a situation into like basically holding it, like basically to get it to hold it against you, we have people there like who want to be there, who understand, who care. It's just like, it's a situation where you do the job because you love it. You do the job because you want to do the job. It's not like you just go there because it's your everyday thing. You have to love the job. And when you love being inside of a school, you can actually see the change inside of a student. I've seen it in multiple teachers. Like I have like 4 or 5 teachers that I love inside of there, and it's because they love their job. If you love your job, a student can tell if you love your job or not. If you come in there like every day, nobody's gonna like, they can tell that you don't want to be here. But if you greet us at the door, you tell us, oh, I love my students, like you don't talk down on us, you're there for us, then we understand the type of place you're coming from. That's one. And also like community wise, I feel like, I don't know, maybe some people might feel different about this, but I specifically feel that if we have social workers go to like, instead of having police officers show up for like every single police call, you could have like social workers show up for like somebody who's ill or somebody who's like going through something. Like you don't send a police officer there because what they do is they fine you and you have to pay that. What if you're in a low community area, a low income area, and you can't pay that? Then they're gonna lock you up and you're gonna be somewhere because you couldn't pay something. It's like there's so many different things that can happen if like, and different outcomes that we can have if we just have social workers answer certain emergency calls. Like we don't need police in a non-violent situation. If it's a violent situation or a serious situation as a murder or a robbery, a police can answer that. We could, like, I forget where it's at, I think it's in Florida somewhere, but they have social workers go and actually visit non like crime committed situations. It's social workers who answer them, not police officers. So I feel like that could be somewhere in our future. If people just look towards it, just like shift that way and like go towards it and actually like have it in their brain, then we could actually accomplish that and actually see that in our future. I think that's something Mac could do is, I could call it that, right? NAC. I feel like something you guys could do is just like stick with us, bring up the conversation, make it like, I wouldn't say an everyday thought, even though it's an everyday thought for me. You could make it an everyday thought if you want, but just have it there, like keep it a conversation, keep it going, like make it a topic that's, yeah, a relevant situation. Just like think of it every day. Make it something to talk about. I think I answered that. Yeah. Research too. We do a lot of research. That's what Drew tells me. Research is key. because you know you always got to have something to back up your facts.
Thank you. And Drew, in the couple minutes we have left, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I feel like I'm not sure, sort of audience-wise. You know, one of the nice things about being in person or going to different spaces is seeing sort of the space and understanding the space that you're in. But I think for me, like the biggest thing is like if we understand the college, and I think this is across colleges, I think this is across sort of educational institutions, like if we understand that educational space to be so formative for our young people, whether they're middle school, high school, or college students, like being committed to care, right? Being committed to your student safety, right, is probably the biggest thing that I can think of in terms of support, right? Like, what does it mean to support the individual and to care about the individual? And that translates into the support of everything else, right? Because we know that like there cannot be any other form of support if the individual, right, is not healthy and well. So I think for teachers, if there's any teachers in the audience, this is something I've been thinking about a lot. It's like, how does that show up in the ways that I teach, right? What does it mean to understand that like our virtual classroom spaces are like, we still have to be committed to our students' health and well-being and their safety. Like the harms that I'm not, you know, like the harms that are, I've worked in elementary all the way up through college, and it's like the harms that are imposed in sort of formal spaces. How do we get rid of all of that? How do we imagine space in which we take the best parts of what did exist in person and we translate that to our virtual spaces, and the harm, we leave that behind? You know, what does it mean for Nashira to be safe in her home, in this classroom, whether that means being comfortable with transitioning from not being on video to being on video, whether it means, you know, our students being able to interact using different sort of modules, whether that means being compassionate and forgiving when it comes to thinking about the different stresses that are on our students right now. Like if our young people are not well and are not alive by the end of this, we aren't going to be able to create any change. So I would just ask if there's any educators or just thinking about institutions that are committed to education, really centering the care of that individual student might be the most important thing that you can do right now in terms of support. Because yeah, Nashira, I think about your commitment to collaboration. Like none of this is going to be possible if we aren't doing it together and if we aren't committed to each other's health and safety.
Well, thanks to both of you, Nashira Brown and Drew Swedberg, for this really fantastic conversation. We have another question in the chat about how to find the proper research on the internet. And I think this would be a great question to take up in the salon. Our session is ending in just about a minute. So I want to give everyone a little break before the next session at 6:30 to watch the full-length film that Drew worked on with his collaborator. And I just need to pull up my notes.
Collaborators, because Nashira is one of our collaborators as well. As a production fellow, she is working on that film too.
Okay, great. So Nashira is a collaborator on that film along with Shellen Buskirk, and that film is called In Love in Memory, correct? So why don't we take up this question in the salon for anyone who is interested, in the lounge on the conference website. And I will pass this over to Ken if he wants to share any closing statements.
Just wanted to say thank you again, Rachel. Really appreciate it.
Thanks to the two of you. Really a great session, and there's some great feedback coming into the chat.
Thank you two so much. Thank you, Rachel, for moderating. Nashira, thank you so much for sharing. You're really inspiring. That was really incredible. I have lots of questions. I hope we get a chance to talk some more. Drew, as a teacher, I'm so excited to just watch you interact with a student. I'm super inspired, and it's making me miss my students because I had them take the week off and just come to the conference. But that was really great. One last thing I want to say is I just wonder if maybe we keep this NCC Peace Conference website conference up. And, you know, we have like these collaborative media production projects, sort of shells of them with the video gallery. And I wonder if this couldn't be maybe the beginning of a space in which we could all be collaborating in a way that you were suggesting you would love to see people in the Valley collaborating and creating things together. We can together create prompts and record video and upload video and collaborate with each other. And so many more conversations to have later. Thank you all the participants who showed up. I hope people can stick around for the movie tonight. And tomorrow we have another full day of programming. So thanks everybody and have a great night. Thank you, Nashira, Drew, and Rachel.
Thank you, everyone. Nice work, Nashira.
Good night, everyone.
Guys.
See you in 15 minutes.
Great job.
Thank you. And yeah, no, I'm gonna take a little bit of a break before 6:30, but look forward to imagining that with you. But I'll let you know. I'll stay in.
All right. I'll see you at 6:30. Wow, that was a really cool session. Thank you so much. That was very cool. Very, very cool.
Appreciate it. Thank you.